Chapter 445, Wicked Heart Granny 4. It was a sensation closer to instinct than reason. He was capable of colder and more rational judgment than anyone else, as he was nearly emotionless compared to ordinary humans. For the first time in his life he had come to like someone, and the sense of loss from that person's annihilation aroused great anger in him. Usually we say that we are swept away by anger. However, for Mok Jae-eun, anger brought about a single-minded focus. It was a single will to desperately kill someone, and because of it all other unnecessary calculations and thoughts disappeared. Swish. Clash clash clash. The idea of deflecting true chi with true chi. And the bold gamble of deflecting the power of a strike, concentrating all power into one point through the subtlety of the scripture of transferring true chi while adding his own power. Crack. This placed a tremendous overload on his body. However, Mok Jae-eun instinctively found the most effective way to unleash this power. It was the chasing whirlwind sword, one of the ultimate techniques of Six Offices Commander So Yirin. Bang! A foot stomp that crushed the ground. Along with it, the sword energy of two powers rotating in a spiral. Crack! With the sound of space tearing, the sword energy imbued with two powers created a whirlwind like a storm. Swish 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 swish. By rotating the powers that didn't mix and could strain the body in a spiral, he made them naturally combine without forcibly mixing them into one. Thus, the whirlwind created by the two powers caused a massive sword energy storm that enveloped Wicked Granny. Boom 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 boom. As even the air was torn apart, dozens of Jang were instantly devastated, and within its center, another strange event was unfolding. Whoosh. Within the storm of sword energy, two formless claws overlapped as if interlocking, wrapping around someone, none other than Wicked Granny. She thought this was the best way to block it since she couldn't avoid it, but that wasn't all. In that state, Wicked Granny inside the two formless claws began to rotate fiercely in the opposite spiral direction. Clash 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 clash. Because of this, as the spiral and counter-spiral overlapped, swish, the whirlwind combining the two powers gradually subsided. And finally the momentum completely dissipated. Thud. Wicked Granny, who had blocked this with an exquisite move, staggered and then coughed up black blood. No matter how much she surpassed Mok Jae-eun in internal energy or power, it was difficult to completely withstand the spiral sword technique that combined her own power concentrated into a single point with Mok Jae-eun's sword energy. After staggering 2 steps, she regained her balance and wiped the blood with her sleeve. Hew. Hew. Her pupils shook as she steadied her breathing. This wasn't because of Mok Jae-eun's innate combat sense and response. It was because of the sword technique Mok Jae-eun had just demonstrated. Without a doubt. This was that person's sword technique. Was this the reason for the scent of the old days emanating from this fellow? She raised her head and looked at Mok Jae-eun. Sizzle. Sizzle. Mok Jae-eun was standing with his formless sword extended, but his arm was trembling, and blood was spurting from some acupoints that couldn't withstand the strain. Although reaching the realm of life and death meant that the subtlety of concentrating power was no longer a technique beyond his limits, it was inevitably straining to also imbue the opponent's power. My right arm won't move. But it didn't matter. He needed to expel the overloaded energy tormenting his body and move other body parts. He expanded his senses by focusing on each part again, starting from the tips of his toes. This incredible concentration of Mok Jae-eun quickly regained control over his body that wasn't moving due to trembling from overload. As sensation returned to his entire body, whoosh, Mok Jae-eun immediately flew towards Wicked Granny. Tap tap. As he flew after kicking off the ground twice, Mok Jae-eun's figure split into 3. It was the subtlety of creating clones from the wind god step he had stolen and learned from the masked Ma-Ari-Hyen. Seeing Mok Jae-eun's figure split into 3 along with the rushing wind, Wicked Granny raised the corner of her mouth. It's certain. The man before her eyes had clearly inherited that person's legacy. So, thud. Wicked Granny immediately knelt on one knee, clasped her hands in a salute and cried out. Wicked Granny Cheol Su Ryan pays respects to the blood descendant who inherited that person's legacy. A glint flashed in Mok Jae-eun's eyes for an instant at her sudden action. But that was the end of it. He didn't know why she was reacting like this, but it didn't matter whether it was a misunderstanding or anything else. The original purpose of coming here was just one thing. It was to retrieve the forbidden technique that could unite souls and help Chong Ryung. But at the point where she had been annihilated, all of that became meaningless. So Mok Jae-eun had only one thought: to kill Wicked Granny. Flinch. Wicked Granny furrowed her brow as Mok Jae-eun didn't stop his attack despite her paying respects, and she tried to create distance by employing her lightness technique. Why? If he was that person's blood relative, he should know her. But why isn't he withdrawing his killing intent and attacking like this? Whoosh. As she wondered, she immediately summoned 3 formless claws to block the sword techniques unleashed by Mok Jae-eun's figures flying in from 3 directions. Clash, 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 clash. Boom, 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 boom. Each move, with power concentrated into it, caused tremendous repercussions every time they clashed. The meadow around where they were fighting had already lost its shape and was becoming devastated. Wicked Granny, blocking Mok Jae-eun's attacks, shouted, "Please stop. I am not your enemy." Despite her cry, Mok Jae-eun had no intention of stopping. Rather, he was pressuring her with increasingly sharp and precise sword techniques. This couldn't help but inwardly surprise Wicked Granny as well. Even though I'm focusing on defense, his sword techniques are becoming increasingly precise. Truly monstrous talent. It was talent that couldn't be measured by simply calling it exceptional. Given enough time, he was the kind of talent that could even surpass the experience she had accumulated. However, this was no time to be surprised. Clash, 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 clash. Wicked Granny, blocking Mok Jae-eun's formless sword, shouted, "I serve your ancestor. There's no reason to fight any." Nonsense. Swish. Wicked Granny hurriedly tilted her head to the side, but her cheek was cut and she ended up bleeding. Her gaze sharpened. The sword techniques were becoming increasingly precise, surpassing a level that could be blocked by defense alone. It was an unbelievably rapid rate of improvement. This won't do. It seemed she needed to mix offense and defense appropriately. It was truly perplexing. She kept talking about her relationship with that person, but why was he attacking her so fiercely as if to kill her? Could it be that he really doesn't know anything? Her expression became subtle. Among those who had intruded here, there were occasionally some who said that everything in the old martial arts world had disappeared after the day of the Great Calamity, but even so, it was a place that once dominated the martial arts world. How could a place once called the greatest under heaven easily disappear? Clash, 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 clash. As she blocked Mok Jae-eun's full-power sword techniques, she thought she needed to change her approach. He kept trying to kill her with tremendous killing intent, so it seemed better to subdue him first and then attempt conversation. So she stopped just defending and gathered her power to launch a strike with her formless claw towards Mok Jae-eun's chest. But at that moment, swish. The formless sword, which had been evenly matched until now because they were in the same realm, pierced through and partially cut the formless claw. Her pupils shook for a moment. He cut the formless claw? Wicked Granny couldn't hide her bewilderment. Of course, even formless energy can be superior depending on one's power. However, because this was basically a realm of enlightenment possible only after reaching the extreme, it was difficult to break with the same formless energy. But now Mok Jae-eun had cut through the formless claw, though not completely. Tremble. What on earth was this? Wicked Granny hurriedly tried to create distance due to the aftermath of the sharp energy penetrating as the formless claw was cut. She could instinctively understand. Beyond becoming more precise, the sword was gradually becoming sharper. What this meant was one thing. He's moving towards a higher realm in the midst of our confrontation. She truly couldn't hide her surprise. Killing intent. The single-minded focus to kill someone was a path that moved away from principle and the way, so it couldn't lead to entering a higher realm. This was something one could know through long years of mental and physical cultivation. But why was this person's sword continually becoming stronger the more they clashed? Clash. As the formless sword and formless claw collided, their figures crossed for an instant. Swish. The formless claw was split even more than before, and Wicked Granny's left shoulder became soaked in blood from a sword wound. Her gaze narrowed as she looked at Mok Jae-eun. Single-minded focus. He could now understand the reason. Although it was killing intent, this was pure single-minded focus. Due to the single-minded focus of only wanting to kill her, the sword was becoming closer to its inherent role, to the point of purity. Throb. She felt pain from the blade energy penetrating her shoulder. feeling pain after such a long time. Any thoughts about this being before her being someone's descendant or anything like that completely disappeared from her mind. A strengthening opponent, a worthy adversary met after a long time. All of this gradually increased her competitive spirit and fighting spirit even more. Since it had come to this, she wanted to properly fight with full power, throwing away all the karma she had accumulated and the shackles towards that person. As she fully unleashed her true chi, strong wind pressure swept around her due to her energy. Having lived for many years, she far surpassed Mok Jaeongun in pure internal energy. Even Mok Jaeongun, who had been focusing only on the single-minded thought of killing her, seemed to judge that everything would be decided in a single move given her changed energy, and he properly took his stance. Swish. It was the moment when these two peerless masters were about to compete with their ultimate techniques. Whoosh. At that moment, someone entered through the distorted gap in the formation torn by Mok Jaeongun's formless sword. Then that someone hurriedly shouted, "Stop!" Despite the ear-splitting shout, neither Mok Jaeongun nor Wicked Granny took their eyes off each other at all. It was a crucial moment. The match would be decided the instant one took their eyes off the opponent. Seeing this, the person who had shouted at them, thinking this wouldn't do, this time flew between them, squeezing in. She was So Yirin. It was 6 Offices Commander So Yirin. However, Wicked Granny, who had no idea who she was, had already made up her mind to settle the match and urged, "Don't interfere, woman." "I can't do that, Wicked Granny Cheol Su Ryan." When she accurately stated her title and name despite seeing her for the first time, one of Wicked Granny's eyebrows raised. "Who are you?" At this question, a chilling, ominous energy surged from 6 Offices Commander So Yirin. Along with this, her black hair turned blood red. Wicked Granny's eyes widened as she watched this. To her, 6 Offices Commander So Yirin, whose hair had completely turned the color of blood, clasped her hands in a salute and said, "Jin Yirin, daughter of Jin Yongin, the last young sect leader of Mushong Fortress, pays respects to Master Cheol Su Ryan who served that person." Chapter 446, Wicked Heart Granny 5. Just half a quarter hour earlier. When 6 Offices Commander So Yirin arrived near the bamboo forest, a fierce battle was already underway. The situation was a clash between those trying to prevent entry into the bamboo forest and those attempting to break through. However, one side numbered in the hundreds while the other was just a small group. Yet the smaller group consisted entirely of extraordinary masters who had surpassed the peak realm, so the battle was somewhat evenly matched. Am I too late? Watching their conflict, she couldn't understand what was going on. She had hurried here as fast as she could, but had the secret society been even faster than her? Just then her eyes caught sight of someone. It was the masked Ma Are Hyan, who had assisted her in the embroidered uniform guards. Ma Are Hyan, 6 Offices Commander. He too spotted her and called out. At this, she instantly swept away the enemies rushing towards Ma Are Hyan with the 4 Shadow Fist and Kick, one of the ultimate techniques of the Wind Shadow 8 forms. Thud 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 thud. Gah. Ugh. After instantly defeating over 10 peak masters with her ultimate technique, she immediately asked Ma Are Hyan, "Has Master Dam Bekha arrived already?" She had asked Dam Bekha, the blood saint of the 9 blood sect, to deliver the information she had discovered to Mok Jaeongun. However, unlike herself who had headed straight for the bamboo forest, she had predicted it would naturally take some time for Dam Bekha to receive that information. But seeing Ma Are Hyan and familiar faces like Sip Chun and Mong Muyak, it clearly meant that Mok Jaeongun had also arrived here. Yet, Master Dam Bekha? What do you mean? Didn't you receive my message from Master Dam Bekha? At her words, Ma Are Hyan replied with a puzzled expression. No, that's not it. We came here with our lord to prevent that dangerous forbidden technique from falling into the hands of the secret society. Ah. At his answer, So Yirin nodded as if relieved and was inwardly surprised. It seemed Mok Jaeongun had already discovered the information she had obtained and had even moved first. If they hadn't arrived first, that important forbidden technique might have fallen into their hands. In any case, the issue now wasn't who arrived first. That mustn't fall into their hands. So she scanned the surroundings and asked, "Where is young Master Mok?" He entered the bamboo forest to stop an enemy who had gone in ahead. There was someone who entered first. Yes. Judging by how much quieter the bamboo forest has become compared to earlier, our lord may have subdued that person. Oh no. At that moment, Ma Arihayan spotted masked individuals from the secret society breaking through their defense line and rushing towards the bamboo forest. As he was about to move, 6 Office's commander So Yiren held out her hand telling him not to intervene and flew off. Whoosh. I'll take care of them, you protect this place. Understood. Although Mok Jiongun's forces overwhelmed in terms of skill, there were so many enemies that they couldn't prevent some from breaking through in time. However, Ma Arihayan thought it fortunate. The best ally had arrived at the perfect moment. So Yiren, who had flown off, created clones with her wind shadow step and instantly caught up with those using lightness techniques to rush towards the bamboo forest, subduing them. Swish. Swish. Swish 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 swish. It took her only the time to count to 3 to subdue 5 masked individuals. After swiftly subduing them, she was about to help Ma Arihayan and the others again when she turned her ear to the sounds coming from inside the bamboo forest. Clang. Clang. The sounds of fighting could be heard from inside. Keek. Kag. Kig. That is. At this, she entered the bamboo forest and discovered a swordsman fighting against grotesque spiritual beasts. It was none other than the Ghost Blade. The Ghost Blade, who had tried to enter through the distorted space gap following Mok Jiongun, was blocking the spiritual beasts that were springing out from the hole created by Destruction Emperor. Seeing the Ghost Blade for the first time, So Yiren couldn't help but be inwardly surprised. This was because, despite seeming injured, he was easily handling quite strong-looking spiritual beasts alone with remarkable swordsmanship. His flower grafting has reached the extreme. Flower grafting is a technique for facing strong enemies with little strength. The Ghost Blade was demonstrating high-level subtleties, such as deflecting even the grotesque attacks of non-human spiritual beasts with his sword to attack other spiritual beasts. However, the spiritual beasts were no ordinary foes, and as they kept coming up through the hole, it seemed too much for him to block alone. So she flew towards them to attack the spiritual beasts and help him. I'll help too. Whoosh. Then. Hugh. I don't know who you are, but if you serve him, help the one who went inside. The Ghost Blade rejected this and pointed at the distorted space gap with his left hand. At his words, 6 Office's commander So Yiren thought. One who serves him? What on earth did that mean? Had he mistaken her for one of Mok Jiongun's subordinates? Rather, she had thought he was an acquaintance of Mok Jiongun or someone related to him. As she wondered, the Ghost Blade shouted at her. The highest executive of the secret society is inside. If the forbidden technique falls into his hands, everything is over. The secret society. So they hadn't completely blocked them? At the Ghost Blade's cry, So Yiren finally changed direction and flew into the distorted space gap. The first thing that caught 6 Office's commander So Yiren's eye upon entering was none other than the devastated meadow and an unconscious man wearing white scale armor. However, her gaze didn't linger on him for long. This was because of 2 peerless masters facing off with an extraordinary aura. Is this possible? Seeing this, she couldn't help but be inwardly astonished. This was because the aura emanating from them was so tremendous that it surpassed even Gu Songbek, the Northern Blade King and also Southern Pacification Commissioner, one of the 6 heavens, no 7 heavens, called the pinnacle of the current martial arts world. She truly couldn't help but be surprised. Is that really young Master Mok? She knew better than anyone that he possessed monstrous talent, having faced him directly. But this was hard to believe. It had barely been 2 months since they parted at the Imperial Palace. Although she too had developed her martial arts further in the meantime, gaining enlightenment through her confrontation with the Northern Blade King, this was truly astonishing. What Mok Jiongun held in his hand was undoubtedly a formless sword, said to be possible only after reaching the pinnacle of swordsmanship. That meant, has he surpassed the wall of walls? He was truly a monster who had transcended human limits. How could such a monster exist? After being at a loss for words for a moment, she then looked at the opponent facing off against Mok Jiongun. While Mok Jiongun's rapid increase in power was remarkable, that woman was no pushover either. She looked to be barely in her early 20s on the outside, but how had she reached such a level of martial arts? Looking at them, the titles for the pinnacle of the current martial arts world would have to change. But 6 Office's commander So Yiren's eyes widened as she looked at the woman facing off against Mok Jiongun. No way. She remembered a story her father, Jin Yongin, had told her long ago. He had told her anecdotes of their ancestors as if telling old folk tales, and there were people who appeared in those legends. Her father had described their appearances in detail, so she remembered exactly. It can't be. Has she been alive all this time? She was so surprised that she covered her mouth with her palm. It was hard to believe, but she soon came to her senses. Thinking about it, even the elder and Dam Bekha of the Nine Blood sect had lived this long, so there was no reason she couldn't either. Moreover, wasn't she the person who had lived the longest even in those days? So she thought she couldn't just stand by. I must stop their fight. Whoosh. So Yiren flew towards them as they faced off and shouted, "Stop!" Despite her ear-splitting cry, neither Mok Jaeon nor Wicked Granny took their eyes off each other at all. Thinking this wouldn't do, she flew between them, squeezing in. Wicked Granny urged her. "Don't interfere, woman." "I can't do that, Wicked Granny Cheol Su Ryan." "Who are you?" At this question, 6 Offices Commander So Yiren employed the grand blood expansive all-overseeing heavens art. Then her black hair turned blood red. Wicked Granny's eyes widened as she watched this. To her, 6 Offices Commander So Yiren, whose hair had completely turned the color of blood, clasped her hands in a salute and said, "Jin Yiren, daughter of Jin Yongin, the last young sect leader of Mushong Fortress, pays respects to Master Cheol Su Ryan, who served that person." In an instant, Wicked Granny's expression, which had been at the peak of fighting spirit, completely softened. This woman before her eyes was that person's blood descendant? Just looking at her blood-red hair, she was undeniably that person's blood relative. Then who was the one facing off against her? She had naturally assumed he was a blood descendant because he could use the luminous star sword art too, one of that person's ultimate techniques, and the lightness technique of the wind shadow 8 forms, 3. As if reading her thoughts, So Yiren no, Jin Yiren turned her head and said to Mok Jaeon, "Young Master Mok, this person is not an enemy. Please stop." And Master Cheol Su Ryan. "Young Master Mok here is not unrelated to our Jin family. He is the 4. Shiver. Before she could finish speaking, Jin Yiren had naturally thought they would stop fighting once she informed them they were allies. But something completely unexpected happened. Mok Jaeon moved with tremendous killing intent. "Young Master Mo." Thud. Ah. As Mok Jaeon waved his hand, Jin Yiren's body was flung to the side by a ferocious energy. Along with this, Mok Jaeon's figure blurred and became a black line that cut through the air. Oh no. At this, Wicked Granny, whose fighting spirit had subsided due to Jin Yiren's appearance, hurriedly tried to grab the single strike, concentrating all power into one point with her 2 hands wrapped in formless claws. Unlike the early stages of their confrontation, she thought she couldn't just block Mok Jaeon's sword that had become even sharper. She had to use all her strength to block it. Clash, 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 clash. The moment the 2 hands wrapped in formless claws and the formless sword collided, blue flames burst out in all directions along with a flash of light, and the ground cracked and caved in from the aftermath. Rumble. Tremble. Wicked Granny's 2 hands and arms shook violently. Her expression contorted. Although her fighting spirit had subsided, this single strike was distinctly different from all the power until now. The sword contained only a persistent single-minded focus to kill her and creep. What is this? The formless sword was becoming tinged with a ferocious black energy and thud, thud, ich. Gradually her figure began to be pushed back. Moreover, cracks were also forming near the palms of the 2 formless claws gripping the formless sword. Because of this, she could understand. It wasn't a matter of fighting spirit. At this moment, this man was overwhelming her. If she let go of her hands and was pushed back further, she would be cut in half like this. Gur. As her life was in danger, she gathered all her true chi into her 2 hands beyond her limits. Her formless claws also became tinged with an even whiter light. Meanwhile, someone approached, barely breaking through this tremendous aftermath, and shouted, "Whoosh. Young. Stop." Even though she was protecting her body with blood-red strong energy, she was having difficulty even breathing due to the tremendous aftermath. At this, Wicked Granny, seeming worried about her, spoke with difficulty. "Why are you doing this? If you have a connection with the Jin family's blood relative, there's no reason to fight." Like this, risking your life. This is retribution for annihilating her. Her. What? Suddenly, Wicked Granny's expression contorted. She wondered who her could be, but because of the word annihilation, she thought of something. Wicked Granny asked, hoping it wasn't true. Wait, you don't mean that vengeful spirit? Your life is the price. Huh. Wicked Granny was genuinely dumbfounded. Was he really trying to kill her like this because of one vengeful spirit? What on earth was she that he would do this? How could a mere soul filled with resentment cause such anger and killing intent? It made no sense at all, but she soon revealed the truth. She wasn't annihilated. What? That vengeful spirit, woman, is trapped in that thatched house over there. No sooner had those words finished. Whoosh. Huh. Mok Jung-un, who had been pressing in with his sword as if to kill, suddenly withdrew his strength and deflected it. Because of this, Wicked Granny, who had been holding the formless sword, couldn't withstand the force and fell forward. Boom. As she fell forward and couldn't withdraw her strength, the ground touched by the formless claws shattered and caved in. Regardless, Mok Jung-un was flying towards the thatched house. Watching his retreating figure, even Jin Yurin stared blankly, not understanding what was happening. His expression changed suddenly. That cold and indifferent face that had been full of terrible killing intent just moments ago brightened in an instant. Chapter 447, Wicked Heart Granny 6. Chong Ryong's spirit body trapped in the Silverwood prison was incredibly faint. She was already weakened due to the talisman formation and Silverwood, but after using the void-stabilizing breath, which consumed the most energy among the subtleties of the 8 thought-shattering techniques, she had reached a dangerous state. She tried to endure with all her might, but even her consciousness was gradually becoming hazy. Mortal. I wonder if Mortal is all right. Though she was on the verge of annihilation trying to save him, she didn't regret it. Even if she couldn't achieve her revenge, if she could save Mortal at this moment, she would be satisfied with that. That was her honest feeling. There was just one thing she regretted. It's a shame that I can't see you before I go. Beyond death, complete annihilation. The demise of a being without an afterlife, that's what she regretted so much. As she grew faint, it became difficult even to keep her eyes open, and her eyelids began to close slowly. It was at that moment. Bang! The door shattered and someone entered the thatched house. As she looked towards it with half-closed eyes, Chong Ryong. The voice she had longed to hear so much reached her ears. Her eyes, which had been about to disappear after consuming all her spirit energy, suddenly widened. Mok Jung, who approached where she was, ruthlessly tore off the talismans on the floor and then, crack. He shattered even the silver wood with his bare hands. The moment the talismans and silver wood were all broken, as the connection with the outside energy was fully restored, her body that had shrunk instantly returned to its original size. Swish swish swish. However, even though her size returned to normal, Chong Ryong's spirit body was still incredibly faint due to the significant damage to her spirit energy. Seeing Mok Jung, Chong Ryong's eyes reddened and she barely held back the tears that were about to pour out. How did you? She had tried to detach him from her karma in every way possible. She didn't want him to be hurt and suffer because of her, who would ultimately be annihilated no matter what. That's why she had tried to shoulder everything herself somehow. But why was he still trying to approach her like this to the very end? Thud. At that moment, Mok Jung-un grabbed both of Chong Ryong's shoulders, and she could see the relief on his face. Seeing Mok Jung-un looking at her affectionately with a brightened face, Chong Ryong finally burst into tears. Sob. Mok Jung-un hugged her tightly. Overwhelmed with emotion, she cried as she spoke to Mok Jung-un. I'm sorry. I should stay away. But the moment I see you, I hate myself for being so happy and relieved. It's okay. Everything's okay. Mok Jung-un comforted her, stroking her head while holding her. In his embrace, she couldn't stop her tears and continued to cry pitifully. Although she thought she was prepared to shoulder everything, the moment she saw Mok Jung-un, it was difficult to control the emotions welling up from within. To her like this, Mok Jung-un said, "You told me to trust someone else. Now you trust me too. I'll protect you. So don't ever leave my side." Swish. At these words from Mok Jung-un, Chong Ryong, who had been crying, embraced his body with both arms. She could no longer deny it, that the part he occupied within her had grown too large. Master Chiol Surayan. Ha, ha. I've shown an unsightly appearance. To that person's blood relative. Wicked Granny clicked her tongue, looking at her hands covered in wounds. If Mok Jangun hadn't deflected his power and stopped midway, her body might have really been cut in two. At this she felt a thrill rather than anger. She had naturally thought that the greatest martial arts talent she had seen so far was that person. But this was truly indescribable. He was simply a monster incarnate. There were plenty of people who grew stronger while fighting, but that usually happened at more basic stages. He was reaching for an even higher dimension of swordsmanship at this level of realm. A sword that surpasses the pinnacle of swordsmanship. What should I call this? It was a sword that seemed to approach the very essence of swordsmanship. He stopped midway, but if he had completed this single strike full of killing intense single-minded focus, he would truly surpass the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Perhaps there would be nothing that sword couldn't cut. As she kept marveling, Jin Yuren asked her, "Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. Such wounds will heal quickly." As she said, the blood flowing from her torn palms was gradually stopping. Wicked Granny Chiol Surayan showed this and then asked, "But who exactly is that fellow?" "He's someone who received teachings from Master Moon Evil Sword." 1. Moon Evil Sword? Huh. She wore an expression of disbelief. So this was why each of his sword techniques had felt somehow familiar. Wicked Granny Chiol Surayan clicked her tongue and said, "That old? No, I didn't know Moon Evil Sword was still alive. When that person invited him to come along, he said he would live according to the natural order and whatnot." I apologize. Thinking about it, if Jin Yuren was that person's blood relative, she wasn't unrelated to Moon Evil Sword. He was that person's father-in-law after all. Feeling like she had made a slip of the tongue, Chiol Surayan apologized. No. It's all right." Jin Yuren shook her head at this. She had heard from her father that Wicked Granny Chiol Surayan had lived even longer than the elder. But that wasn't important right now. More importantly, I apologize for being discourteous as soon as we met, Master Chiol Surayan. Thud. Jin Yuren clasped her hands in a salute to her. At this, Wicked Granny Chiol Surayan waved her hands, trying to undo her salute. "No, you don't need to mind such things. I am that person's faithful servant. You, being that person's blood relative, don't need to show such a gesture. No. Even if you served that person, what I'm about to say will be disrespectful to you, Master Chiol Surayan." Disrespectful. Thud. Jin Yuren knelt on both knees on the ground, not satisfied with just a salute. "No, what are you doing? Please get up quickly." "No. I can't do that." At this, a flustered Chiol Surayan tried to make her stand up, but she was immovable. "How can you do this? If you do this, I won't be able to face that person. Please stand up." "I can't until Master Chiol Surayan agrees to help." "What?" At her words asking for help, Chiol Surayan furrowed her brow. She had guessed there was some reason they had come to this hidden place, but she didn't expect such an earnest attitude. "Young miss. My father, the last young sect leader, along with Mushong Fortress, the blood sect, even numerous martial arts sects were annihilated and sacrificed on the day of the Great Calamity." At these words from Jin Yuren, Chiol Surayan's expression froze. She had heard about the day of the Great Calamity from those who had intruded here. They had said that the level of the martial arts world had greatly declined since then. However, she never imagined this story would include Mushong Fortress and the Blood Sect. Even if they weren't as great as during that person's time, she thought Mushong Fortress and the Blood Sect would still be solid due to the descendants who had continued the lineage. Chiol Surayan then looked up at the sky, which had cracks due to the damaged formation. Has that person's concern become reality? That person had said, "Everything that exists will decay, and that would be no different for Mushong Fortress or the Blood Sect." Had it really come to pass? Even though it had been a long time since that person left, it was truly hard to believe. To her, who was feeling bitter, Jin Yuren continued speaking in an earnest voice. On the day of the Great Calamity, numerous spiritual beasts and even spirit beasts went berserk and tried to destroy the human world. At that time, many heroes of the Central Plains, including my grandfather, came forward and sacrificed themselves to stop it. However, this was not a natural occurrence. My father, the last young sect leader, discovered that it was caused by certain individuals. That organization is still intact and again. Swish. At that moment, before she could finish speaking, Cheol Su-ryan raised her hand. Jin Yuren looked at her, puzzled by her incomprehensible attitude. Then Cheol Su-ryan, thud, knelt on both knees like her, clasped her hands in a salute and opened her mouth. I apologize. I understand what you want to ask, young miss, but I cannot leave this place. What? Jin Yuren, who hadn't yet made any request, couldn't hide her bewilderment. She had thought that if this woman, who had achieved great fame even in the old martial arts world and possessed martial arts surpassing the seven heavens called the pinnacle of the current martial arts world, helped them, they could more easily eliminate the enemies behind the scenes. But to be rejected before even making the request, she couldn't help but feel deflated. Moreover, wasn't she that person's loyal servant? How could she reject so coldly without even listening to everything? Master Cheol Su-ryan, I have already received punishment from that person to guard this place and cleanse my karma. Cleanse your karma? Although all martial artists accumulate much karma, I killed numerous innocent women and children to save my blind eyes and this womb. At wicked Granny Cheol Su-ryan's words, spoken calmly as if confessing, Jin Yuren was momentarily at a loss for words. Although she had heard old stories from her father, she didn't properly know the specific reasons why she was called a great villain. However, unexpectedly, the karma she bore was incomparably stronger than ordinary people. Seeing her surprised look, Cheol Su-ryan spoke in a bitter voice. I was accumulating merit to cleanse my karma here, and I swore to that person on my life that no matter what happened, I would not leave this place. Ah! A sigh escaped Jin Yuren's lips. She had thought this was an opportunity to gain not only the forbidden technique but also the best ally. But that expectation was crumbling so hopelessly. Then wicked Granny Cheol Su-ryan said to her, who couldn't hide her disappointment. However, the reason that person left me here was not just to cleanse my karma. What do you mean? Please follow me. Wicked Granny Cheol Su-ryan stood up and guided her towards the thatched house. As they entered the thatched house, Mok Jae-eun was there alone. At this, Cheol Su-ryan looked at the broken silver wood bars with wary eyes. Could it be that the vengeful spirit couldn't endure in the end and was annihilated? If that was the case, she might have to fight this man again. But then, do you know about the forbidden technique? Mok Jae-eun wasn't angry at all. Rather, he was extremely calm. Puzzled by this, Cheol Su-ryan asked, hoping it might be the case. Where did that vengeful spirit go? That's none of your business, old monster. You. For a moment her voice almost rose, but Cheol Su-ryan soon calmed her anger. There was no point in fighting this guy again, she would only be at a disadvantage. From the moment she took the vow not to kill, those with equal or greater power than her became enemies she couldn't face. Did you really defeat that old monster? Chong Ryong's voice reached Mok Jae-eun's ears. Chong Ryong, whose spirit body had been damaged to the brink of annihilation while trapped in the silver wood, had voluntarily entered the wooden puppet to recover her spirit energy. Chong Ryong couldn't hide her surprise seeing wicked Granny somewhat overwhelmed in aura. To think she could do this even to a great villain of the old martial arts world, she wondered where the limit of this mortal fellow was. Meanwhile, Jin Yuren, who was behind them, sighed and said, Young Master Mok, I don't know what happened, but if the misunderstanding is cleared up, please stop now. At her words, Mok Jae-eun lightly shrugged his shoulders. Then Cheol Su-ryan glared at Mok Jae-eun with a displeased expression, then brought a wooden box that had been in the corner of the thatched house and placed it on the table. At this, Jin Yuren asked in a puzzled voice, What is this? It's the arrangement that person left behind. That person left it? Yes. Please open it yourself. As Cheol Su-ryan urged, holding out her hand, Jin Yuren hesitated for a moment before opening the lid of the wooden box with a tense expression. Click. When she opened it, there was an old wooden slip and a book inside. Jin Yuren's eyes shook as she saw the writing on the cover of the book. Heavenly Concealed Luminous Star Sword Art, Chapter 448, Arrangement. 1. Heavenly Concealed Luminous Star Sword Art. Jin Yuren's eyes widened as she saw the characters written on the cover of the book, one of the two items revealed when the wooden box's lid opened. The luminous star sword art could be considered the exclusive martial art of her family, the Jin clan. Such luminous star sword arts existed in various forms, and it was said that the divine path luminous star sword art, known to possess the most perfect sword path and attainable only by reaching the highest realm, was abruptly cut off when the lord of Mushang Fortress, her grandfather, passed away. But what on earth was this? Heavenly concealed luminous star sword art? This was a name she had never heard of even from her father, the minor fortress lord Jin Yongin. Could it be a new luminous star sword art that he had created? As she stood there, unable to easily reach out and touch it, wicked Granny Cheol Surayan spoke with a gentle smile, apparently relieved after a long wait. This is what that person left for you. For me. But that person has already. Yes, that person is no longer here. However, he said long ago that when he had cleansed all his karma, his blood descendants would visit this place. He foresaw that I would come here? Yes, he said that in his later years he had awakened to the Taoist path and thus became able to read some of the heavenly secrets. He foresaw that great calamities might befall the Central Plains someday, but lamented that he could not intervene as it was a matter of the distant future. So he arranged this? Cheol Surayan nodded in response to her question. That's right. This arrangement. Before she could finish her sentence, Jin Yiren cut her off. Then, with a voice tinged with slight disappointment, she spoke. Is what you said, but why did he just leave the day of the great calamity alone? The day of the great calamity. On that day, Mushang Fortress and the Blood Sect. Everything crumbled and his descendants lost their lives miserably. Now you speak of arrangement. Young miss. No. Please listen to me first. Her voice, which had been extremely calm, was gradually rising. As Cheol Surayan closed her mouth, she continued her words. Everyone died on the day of the great calamity, and at best I'm the only surviving blood relative. What exactly did he intend to protect by leaving this arrangement? If he could read the heavenly secrets, shouldn't he have at least prevented the destruction of Mushang Fortress and our clan, even if not the worst calamity? She roughly grabbed the secret manual of the heavenly concealed luminous star sword art and shook it, speaking with reddened eyes. This can never be called an arrangement. After losing everything, passing on something like this now, how is it any different from urging revenge? This isn't an arrangement, it's the day of the great calamity. Those who came from outside spoke of that day. They said a calamity struck where all sorts of monstrous beings ran wild, causing numerous sects and martial artists to lose their lives. This time, Cheol Surayan interrupted her words. Then with a deep sigh she continued. It was truly heartbreaking. While his blood relatives were losing their lives outside, the reality that we knew nothing inside here was so frustrating. I don't misunderstand your feelings. You said you lost your blood relatives and survived alone, so how could anyone put that pain into words? I too am sincerely grieved beyond measure. But on the other hand, it's like this. How much more should he have done for his descendants to be satisfied? What? He already left his blood relatives the most powerful martial organization in the Murim, passed down the highest martial arts of the era, and even bequeathed outstanding talents as an inheritance. Yet despite this, did his blood relatives want him to violate the natural order, remain in the world forever, protect his descendants, watch over them until they grew old and died and care for them like children? For a moment she was at a loss for words. She had spoken out of disappointment upon receiving something said to be his arrangement after losing everything due to the day of the great calamity. However, when Cheol Surayan coldly pointed out the reality, she could not give any answer. He has already watched countless times as his old friends and acquaintances all passed away, and even their children grew old, fell ill and died. Do you think it would be easy to watch his own children and descendants die like that? Despite this, isn't it rather a cruel wish towards him who could be called your ancestor, to expect him to solve everything that will happen in the future? At this piercing rebuke, as sharp as a needle killing with an inch of steel, Jin Yiren immediately became dejected. Deep down she felt too ashamed. She had spoken out of momentary disappointment, but she too believed that Cheol Surayan's words were right. That person, their ancestor, had already left behind everything he could give and departed. The day of the great calamity was something that no one could have done anything about from the beginning, so everyone was inevitably caught up in an unavoidable disaster. Jin Yiren held back the tears that were about to fall and opened her mouth. I apologize. It seems I've spoken too childishly. Chil Surayan, your words are correct. He has already left us many things. Nevertheless, faced with the reality of being the only one left among the clan, my heart weakened unnecessarily, and I seem to have committed a discourtesy. Please. Suk. As Jean Yurin was about to bow her head in apology, bringing her hands together in a martial salute, Chil Surayan stopped her and said, No. It's natural to want to lean on something or vent your frustrations when you've lost your entire clan and barely managed to hold on alone. Suk. Chil Surayan embraced her and said, There's no need to forcibly hide your pain. If the path you've endured alone has been arduous, it's okay to cry for a moment. At these warm words, tears that Jean Yurin had been holding back finally flowed from her eyes. Although she had always maintained a cold demeanor, earning her the nickname Ice Flower, even among the Imperial embroidered guards, she had endured the most difficult days alone. Revenge against the beings who caused the day of the great calamity and destroyed her clan. And a sense of mission to revive her clan once again. Bearing all these burdens, she had considered it a luxury to shed tears or show weakness until now. But at this moment she couldn't help but be overwhelmed with emotion at Chil Surayan's warm comfort. However, these tears didn't last long. That was because there's no time to keep crying. It was due to Mok Jaeongun. Chil Surayan, who had been consoling Jean Yurin, glared at him with displeasure, but Mok Jaeongun didn't care at all. There are still enemies outside. At these words, Jean Yurin, who had been crying, wiped her tears with her sleeve and said, her face slightly flushed with embarrassment. That's right. I almost forgot about that. Young miss. It's all right. Young Master Mok is right. We don't have time for this right now. She quickly tucked the secret manual of the heavenly concealed luminous star sword art into her bosom. Then, pointing to the rolled-up wooden slips in the wooden box, she asked, What is this? Chil Surayan showed a puzzled look at her question. What's wrong? Actually, I don't know about this either. What do you mean you don't know? He put it in saying that the one who was meant to have it would naturally come to possess it, but he didn't mention specifically what it was. The one who was meant to have it would come to possess it? What could it be for him to leave such an ambiguous message? Wondering, she picked up the wooden slips and unrolled them. To be precise, since they were made of bamboo, it would be more correct to call them bamboo slips. The bamboo slips unexpectedly contained little content, with only 6 pieces strung together and rolled up, on which 30 Chinese characters were listed haphazardly. At a glance, it was completely incomprehensible what they were saying. Seeing this, she frowned. What on earth is this? Meanwhile, Mok Jaeongun, who was observing from a slight distance behind, caught a glimmer in his eye. That is. Mok Jaeongun recognized at once what the 30 characters written on the bamboo slips were. It was undoubtedly the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. However, while the arrangement and positioning of the written formulas might seem disorganized to those who didn't know, it felt strangely regular. Moreover, looking at it, there seemed to be something engraved on the side of the bamboo slips, which he wanted to see once. As if sensing this gaze, Jean Yurin asked, Young master, you seem to have a look as if you've seen this before. Do you know what this is? Jean Yurin held out the bamboo slips to Mok Jaeongun. Young miss, how can you show that to an outsider? Chil Surayan hastily tried to stop her. However, no. Young Master Mok is also a disciple of the elder, so strictly speaking he's not an outsider. And didn't you say Chil Surayan? He put it in saying that the one who was meant to have it would naturally come to possess it, but he didn't mention specifically what it was. Those were her words. At this, Chil Surayan lowered her hand that had tried to stop her. Then Jean Yurin held out the bamboo slips to Mok Jaeongun again and asked, Do you know what this is? At her question, Mok Jaeongun took the bamboo slips and, looking at Chil Surayan instead of Jean Yurin, said, If you pass on the forbidden technique of merging souls, I'll tell you what this is. What did you say? Chil Surayan was dumbfounded at those words. Is this guy really the one who received teachings from that old man Moon Evil Sword? It had been a long time since she'd encountered someone who wouldn't back down and tried to gain something from her, not since the young days of him. But why are this guy and those from outside so hung up on that forbidden technique of merging souls? As she was wondering, Jean Yurin spoke. Chil Surayan. Yes. I too came here to prevent that forbidden technique from falling into the hands of the group behind the great calamity. If it's all right with you, could you teach it to young Master Mok here? Cheol Su Ryan stared intently at Mok Jae-eun. Then she nodded. She didn't particularly want to teach it, but it was because of the request from Jin Yurin, who was that person's blood relative. I'll teach you, so you tell the young miss what that is. This is the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. What? At those words, Jin Yurin's eyes, which had no particular expectation for the bamboo slips, widened. She had heard about it not from her father, the minor fortress Lord Jin Yong-in, but from floating rumors. Is this the supreme secret manual? At that moment, wicked Granny Cheol Su Ryan, who was standing beside her, asked in a tone of incomprehension. Supreme secret manual? Yes. I don't know why it was called that, but I heard that at one time, countless people fought and shed great blood to possess this secret manual called the 8 thought-shattering techniques. At these words, Cheol Su Ryan let out a strange sigh. Huh. Why do you react like that? So it was called that. Did you know about it? Cheol Su Ryan nodded at Jin Yurin's question. I didn't know that what was in here was what he had mentioned. What do you mean by that? As far as I know, before he left, he spent a long time pondering and left his lifetime of enlightenment melted into the hidden underground secret storage of Mushong Fortress. In the underground secret storage of Mushong Fortress? Yes. But how did it end up here? Rather than how, it seems that he foresaw that this essence of his enlightenment would eventually fall into the hands of others, not his descendants. So, perhaps out of precaution he put it here as well. Ah. At Cheol Su Ryan's words, Jin Yurin's expression became strange. That was because it seemed that he had left many things not only for this arrangement but also for future generations. Looking at it this way, despite these various arrangements of his, Mushong Fortress ultimately failed to prevent its annihilation. In the end, even if one can read the heavenly secrets, is an approaching calamity something that cannot be prevented from the beginning? Her mind couldn't help but become complicated. While they were conversing like this, Mok Jae-eun seemed interested in something else and was examining the patterns engraved on the side of the bamboo slips. At first glance they looked like mere patterns, but they were signifying something. Flowing water, burning fire, this is earth? As he examined this, Mok Jae-eun could be certain of what the 5 engraved patterns were. This was the 5 elements: fire, water, wood, earth, metal. Although he didn't know why these were engraved on the side, they seemed to be related to the somewhat regular arrangement of the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. Chapter 449, Arrangement 2. The pattern engraved on the thin side of the bamboo slips. It appeared to represent the 5 elements: fire, water, wood, earth, and metal. Although it was unclear why this was engraved on the side, it seemed to be related to the somewhat regular arrangement of the formula for the 8 thought-shattering techniques. Regular arrangement and the 5 elements. This was clearly related. The 8 thought-shattering techniques condensed enlightenment that diverged from the norm into 30 characters, so one had to diversify their perspective to realize new formulas. However, no matter how intently one stared at this, despite its seemingly regular arrangement, no clues about any formula could be found. It doesn't combine. From the start, this arrangement itself didn't fit. It was as if the formula was deliberately tangled to make one conscious of it and interfere. Why? It's strange to do it this way when the formula is tangled. Intentionally made, but the arrangement doesn't fit. Why on earth was it made like this? As he was pondering deeply, Jin Yurin called out to him. Young Master Mok? What is it? Come to think of it, how do you know about this, young Master Mok? This. The 8 thought-shattering techniques, I mean. Ah. Even if young Master Mok had heard rumors, you couldn't know whether this is the 8 thought-shattering techniques or not without directly seeing its contents. At these words, Cheol Su Ryan also agreed and chimed in. That's right. Where on earth did you see the 8 thought-shattering techniques? To know the formula of just 30 characters unless you've memorized it from the beginning. What kind of answer do you want? What? It happened to fall into my hands while floating around here and there. But are you asking this because you want to dispute ownership now? At Mok Jae-eun's words, Cheol Su Ryan clicked her tongue as if exasperated and raised her voice. Huh, ownership? You're quite a ridiculous fellow. I don't know how you obtained it, But that formula you came to know is what he condensed his enlightenment into and left for his descendants. Do you know what that means? The true owner of the formula you've learned is naturally only young Miss Jean Yurin, the last blood relative of the Jean family. How absurd. Absurd? You, the very person you claim is the owner, just found out about it, yet you're interrogating me about how I know the formula. Enough. At that moment, Jean Yurin intervened, cutting off Mok Jaeongun's words. Then letting out a deep sigh she said, "This isn't an interrogation, and as young master said, I have no intention of disputing ownership over this now. I was just curious about how far what he left in Mushong Fortress's hidden underground secret storage had flowed, so I asked." This was what she really wanted to ask. As it was the supreme secret manual that condensed the enlightenment of her ancestor, not just anyone else, she thought there must be some background to how Mok Jaeongun came to know this formula. So she just wanted to know how it had come into Mok Jaeongun's hands. It's from Mok Gon, also known as the secret society's leader. At Mok Jaeongun's sudden words, her expression immediately hardened. Having shared information between them, she knew that behind the day of the Great Calamity was an organization called the Secret Society and a leader known as Mok Gon. The Secret Society's leader, what on earth? You said you were curious about how far it had gone, so I told you. It's a fact I learned from fighting with Mok Gon's avatar recently, so it's certain. Mok Gon's avatar? What does that mean? He is. Tuk-tuk. Mok Jaeongun tapped his forehead with his finger as he continued speaking. A being with a third eye on his forehead. In other words, he's become one with an Imi Manjiang. It's fair to say he is essentially the Imi Manjiang itself. Imi Manjiang. He can implant his mind and will into other bodies and use them as avatars. It's good to know this. His avatars are not just one. There are at least several. And because each avatar shares his will, you can consider them to be almost equal to his main body. Mok Jaeongun shared the information he knew as he had intended to share it anyway. At these words from Mok Jaeongun, Jean Yurin clicked her tongue and asked, "What did you do with that avatar? Did you let it escape?" "I killed it." "Ah." Jean Yurin couldn't hide her surprise at Mok Jaeongun's answer. She had been tracing the remnants of the one who destroyed her clan and caused the day of the Great Calamity, and had just barely approached an important clue, but Mok Jaeongun had already directly encountered him and even fought. Surprised by this, she soon calmed herself and continued speaking. "You always surprise me. It's not that surprising since I didn't kill the main body. Still, even indirectly, the fact that you approached a being that shares consciousness is important." She, who had been clicking her tongue, soon returned to the main point. "But when I asked how far the secret manual he left behind had been passed on, you mentioned that person, the leader of the secret society. Does that mean he possesses the 8 thought-shattering techniques?" "Yes." Quack. At Mok Jaeongun's answer, Jean Yurin bit her lip hard. Wicked Granny Cheol Surayan's expression also twisted terribly. How did this happen? That was because for Cheol Surayan, it was the pinnacle of learning left by him, and for Jean Yurin, it was an arrangement left by her ancestor. And now, this important thing had fallen into the hands of none other than the mastermind behind the day of the Great Calamity. This fact was enough to enrage them. "Young Master Mok, do you perhaps know how it came into the hands of the secret society's leader?" "I do know." Mok Jaeongun had heard about the origins of the 8 thought-shattering techniques through Chong Ryong, who knew the origins of the Heaven-Earth-Moon Society. He just didn't know that the organization said to have been destroyed was Mushong Fortress. It was truly coincidental beyond measure. That's how connections are linked in such ways. Due to the secret manual of the destroyed Mushong Fortress, numerous conflicts arose in the martial arts world, and as a result, organizations like the Heaven-Earth-Moon Society and then the Heaven and Earth Society were born. And right before his eyes was the last legitimate descendant of that Mushong Fortress. It felt like numerous branching paths were finally converging into one at the end. How did you come to possess that person's enlightenment?" Jean Yurin asked, struggling to suppress her anger. This was very important to her. In response, Mok Jaeongun was about to answer, but then he turned his head towards Wicked Granny Cheol Surayan instead of Jean Yurin and said, "The forbidden technique comes first." "What?" Cheol Surayan was dumbfounded at Mok Jaeongun's words. She had already agreed to teach it, so why was this guy so urgently insisting on this? Even Jean Yurin, who was suppressing her anger, couldn't help but express her irritation as Mok Jae-un prioritized his own goal in this situation. Young Master Mok, Chil Su-ryan already said she would teach it, so why are you? There are enemies outside. And my subordinates are holding them back. I know. I don't intend to stay here for long. Variables can occur at any time. So the forbidden technique comes first. Faced with Mok Jae-un's continued firm attitude, Chil Su-ryan finally couldn't contain her anger and shouted. You have no sense of moderation. Chil Su-ryan. Young miss. This won't do. Whether this person is an outsider or received teachings from Moon Evil Sword isn't important. Without mutual respect, prioritizing only oneself. Su-ryan. I'm asking you. Ha. Chil Su-ryan let out a sigh at Jin Yiren's earnest request. She felt that Jin Yiren had already given up. Although angry, she understood Jin Yiren's feelings, so Chil Su-ryan roughly flipped through an old book shelved in the thatched house's study. If it weren't for the young miss, I would never have passed this on to you. Mok Jae-un silently took the book and quickly flipped through it, skimming the contents. Watching him, Jin Yiren inwardly clicked her tongue. Since they had a common enemy, she ultimately yielded, realizing it was meaningless to quarrel and get red-faced over this, but on the other hand she was puzzled. While the secret society seemed to be after the forbidden technique to plot something behind the scenes, why was Mok Jae-un so intent on obtaining this forbidden technique? Suk. As she was thinking this, Mok Jae-un tucked the book on the forbidden technique into his bosom and opened his mouth. I'll explain briefly since we're in a hurry. When Mushung Fortress was destroyed on the day of the Great Calamity, coincidentally, the keeper of the secret storage hidden underground survived. The secret storage keeper? Yes. His name was Yang Bai-ryu. They say he was lucky to survive because he was underground. Yang Bai-ryu, who survived like that, tried for a long time to find a descendant of Mushung Fortress to pass on the 8 thought-shattering techniques. However, he eventually died without finding a descendant of Mushung Fortress. Huh. So that's how the secret manual of the 8 thought-shattering techniques came out into the world. That's the result, yes. After Yang Bai-ryu died, his 3 adopted sons apparently fought over it for quite a long time. It even became a power struggle at some point. That was the war that broke out over what the world called the Supreme Secret Manual. Mok Jae-un briefly explained how in this process, the 3 clans made a pact to stop the war, determine the owner of the secret manual and create a new organization. And in that story he quickly revealed how the Heaven-Earth-Moon Society was formed, and then due to the schemes and madness of the secret society's leader, Mok Gon, who took over the body of the Heaven Vein clan's leader, the Moon Vein clan was destroyed, and the current Heaven and Earth Society was formed. Of course he omitted the detailed anecdotes related to Chong Ryung. Jin Yiren, who heard all of this, couldn't help but feel troubled. How did it come to this? The secret manual containing his enlightenment didn't end up in the hands of her father Jin Yongin, the surviving clan's descendant, but instead floated around in the war between the descendants of the surviving secret storage keeper Yang Bai-ryu, and finally ended up in the hands of Mok Gon, who destroyed Mushung Fortress. What was interesting in this process was that the Heaven and Earth Society, in a sense, was no different from an organization made up of descendants of Mushung Fortress. Chil Su-ryan seemed to have the same thought. I suppose it's fair to say that this Heaven and Earth Society also ultimately derived from Mushung Fortress. That's right. But it's too humiliating that his enlightenment ended up in the hands of the mastermind who destroyed Mushung Fortress and drove our clan to death. Quack. Purru. Jin Yiren clenched her fist so tightly that her nails dug into her flesh. She sincerely wanted to catch that mastermind, Mok Gon, tear his entire body apart, burn every piece of his flesh and kill him. To her in this state, Mok Jae-un suddenly asked. But I don't understand why this was divided into 2. What? Didn't you say earlier? That ancestor you call, that person, left the 8 thought-shattering techniques in a hidden secret storage for his descendants. But if he guessed it might not end up in the hands of his descendants, there was no reason to leave the 8 thought-shattering techniques there in the first place. At Mok Jae-un's words, Jin Yiren also became puzzled. Thinking about it, if he was going to leave the 8 thought-shattering techniques here, there was no reason to leave it in Mushung Fortress's underground secret storage. Also, conversely, why didn't he put the secret manual of the heavenly concealed luminous star sword art there? Cheol Surayan said this secret manual was an important arrangement for the descendant who would find this place. Then shouldn't this have been put in the underground secret storage as well? It's strange. There were parts that didn't quite add up. He might have left only that in the underground secret storage out of concern for his descendants, just in case, but in the end, it fell into the hands of Mok Gon, the leader of the secret society who destroyed Mushong Fortress. If he could even read the heavenly secrets, couldn't he have predicted this as well? To deliberately leave a secret manual that would fall into someone else's hands. Ah. As she was pondering, she suddenly stared intently at Mok Jaeongun, who was holding the bamboo slips with the formula of the 8 thought-shattering techniques written on them. Come to think of it, Mok Jaeongun also said he obtained the formula of the 8 thought-shattering techniques by chance. Wait. Could it be? Kwang. At that moment, a tremendous roar came from outside, shaking the entire thatched house. Kururu. Perhaps due to the aftershock, not just a small part but about 1/3 of the pillar at the center of the thatched house cracked and fissured. Seeing this, they instinctively realized that something had gone wrong with the formation. At this, Cheol Surayan shouted at Mok Jaeongun. Give those bamboo slips to the young miss. She thought Jin Yurin should take them as this was also his arrangement. Mok Jaeongun, who already knew the formula and had memorized the patterns engraved on the side and the regularity of the arrangement, was about to roll them up again and hand them over without particular greed. But at the moment he was rolling up the bamboo slips. Tweruk. At that instant as the bamboo slips were being rolled up, space distorted and Mok Jaeongun's body was sucked into it. Along with that, the rolled-up bamboo slips fell to the floor. Jin Yurin and wicked Granny Cheol Surayan couldn't hide their bewilderment at the sudden turn of events. What on earth had just happened? Hurriedly, Jin Yurin tried to suck in the bamboo slips with her void-grasping technique and unroll them again. But right at that moment, Kwang. The wall of the thatched house right in front of them was torn away. Along with that, the outside was revealed and there stood a middle-aged man with a third eye on his forehead, his hands behind his back. Mok Jaeongun looked around. In the blink of an eye, Jin Yurin and Cheol Surayan who had been nearby disappeared, and suddenly everything around him changed. He had clearly been inside a thatched house but looking around this place seemed to be some mountain peak. So Mok Jaeongun approached the cliff at the edge of the mountain peak to figure out where this place was. But, what on earth? Mok Jaeongun doubted his eyes. That was because while the sky was clearly clear and blue, the ground below the peak was not visible. All that could be seen was a black floor which looked like an endless abyss. What on earth is this place? Thinking it might be an illusion, he walked along the edge of the peak looking down, but even after a full circle he couldn't see the bottom. He was just wondering about this when looking down won't show you a way down. Mok Jaeongun frowned at the voice coming from behind. He was clearly the only one on top of the mountain peak. Moreover, he hadn't sensed any presence from behind, so why did he hear a voice? After a moment's consideration, Mok Jaeongun grasped his sword hilt and naturally turned his head. There was a rock about waist high and sitting on top of it was someone of unknown identity wearing a demon mask.